But of that day or that hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father.
I mean, it really remains one of the most just stunning admissions in all of ancient literature.
Right. And that startling declaration of, total ignorance, it's actually just the finale of a massive, heavily encoded prophecy. So today, your mission is to decode the intense political tension, the deep historical trauma, and, well, the explosive drama hidden right inside Mark chapter 13.
We are looking at an ancient text that was honestly incredibly dangerous to even possess.
Exactly. And somewhere right in the middle of this intense apocalyptic warning, the author actually breaks the fourth wall. Like they pause the narrative to give a secret, urgent wink directly to the reader.
Which is wild. We are looking at a literary device that completely reframes how a historian or a theologian approaches the entire document.
Yeah, it totally forces us to ask who was reading this and what terrifying reality they were actively running from.
Right, definitely.
So, to get to that secret code, we have to start with the physical reality that sparked the entire conversation. We're on the Mount of Olives, right? Jesus and his disciples are leaving the massive temple complex in Jerusalem, and one of the disciples is just staring in absolute awe at the stonework.
And we're talking about Herod the Great's monumental rebuilding project, which he initiated around 20 BCE.
Yeah.
Archaeologists today, working near the southern wall of the Temple Mount, they've actually uncovered individual foundation stones weighing hundreds of tons.
Hundreds of tons. That's just... imagine you're a peasant from a tiny Galilean village. Your entire framework for a building is like maybe a local synagogue or a timber-roofed house,
Right, it's entirely outside their normal experience.
Yeah, so walking into Herod's precinct would be like a medieval peasant who's never seen anything taller than a haystack, suddenly wandering into a supersized, politically weaponized version of Notre Dame. It would look like alien technology.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer scale of that architecture was specifically engineered to overwhelm the human senses. It projected this permanent, unshakable power, towering over a landscape where most people lived in modest structures of fieldstone and mud.
It would feel eternal.
Exactly. But then Jesus just shuts down the admiration instantly. In Mark 13.2, he points at the structures and says, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone on another which will not be thrown down."
Which, making a public prediction about the physical destruction of that specific complex, that is crossing a very dangerous line.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because at first glance, predicting a building might fall down just sounds like, pessimistic architectural critique, or like a warning about an earthquake. But the reaction this provokes implies a threat to the state itself. Why is that?
Well, the temple was the economic and political anchor of Judean society under Roman occupation. It essentially functioned as the central bank.
Wait, really? A bank? Yeah, holding the national wealth, the tithes, the official debt records, the priestly aristocracy, centered around the high priest and the Sanhedrin Council. They derived their local authority and massive financial resources directly from the daily operations of this complex.
Ah, okay, so it's the center of literally everything.
Exactly. And Herod's dynasty poured resources into embellishing it to legitimize their own client king status. It was basically a centuries-long PR campaign.
Right, to prove their value to the Roman Empire and establish dominance over the local population. And Rome permitted this massive concentration of regional wealth for a highly pragmatic reason, right? It maintained the political equilibrium.
Yes, it kept the province stable. So by declaring that every single one of those 100-ton stones will be thrown to the ground, Jesus is threatening the absolute center of gravity for their entire world.
Wow.
He's describing the total collapse of the regional power structure, the financial system propped up by the building, the local authority of the priesthood, and ultimately the peacekeeping arrangement overseen by Rome.
And that kind of rhetoric gets you flagged by very ruthless people as a destabilizing force. But Jesus warns his followers that this systemic collapse will be preceded by an abomination of desolation. But what exactly are those four words, and why would hearing them trigger a deeply buried, terrifying cultural trauma for anyone listening?
So to understand that, we have to look closely at the historical echoes he's deliberately invoking. The conversation actually moves away from the crowds here.
Right. They cross over to the Mount of Olives, sitting directly across from the temple, looking back at it.
Yeah, and Peter, James, John, and Andrew pull Jesus aside privately. They want the specific timeline. They ask when this destruction will happen and what the warning signs will be.
And Jesus answers them in distinct layers. He maps out the opening contractions first. He tells them to watch out for imposters coming in his name. Then he lists wars, rumors of wars, earthquakes in various places, and famines.
Right.
But I have to push back on this a little bit because from a purely historical standpoint, wars, earthquakes, and famines are just a constant baseline for human civilization.
Yeah.
They were happening before this conversation, and they happen today. If I'm a disciple trying to survive a regime collapse, a famine feels like a pretty vague warning sign.
It is vague, yeah, if you view it purely as a geopolitical event. But in the framework of ancient apocalyptic literature, these events are understood as birth pangs.
Oh, I see.
They're the initial agonizing spasms of a world transitioning from one age to another. So Jesus is essentially telling them not to panic at the ambient chaos of the world, because the ambient chaos is just the preamble.
Right. The real threat is highly specific and brutally personal, because then the prophecy pivots from global earthquakes to institutional vulnerability.
Exactly.
He describes a scenario where his followers will have absolutely no legal protection. They'll face arrests, beatings in synagogues, and they will be dragged before Roman governors and kings.
And the political landscape he describes maps flawlessly onto the Roman provincial system in the region at that time. You have the prefects of Judea, Pontius Pilate's successors, acting as the Roman governors, who hold the ultimate power of life and death.
Right.
And then you have the client rulers, the Herodian tetrarchs, operating as the kings enforcing regional compliance.
So Jesus is detailing the absolute terror of belonging to a movement with zero legal standing. There's no patron class stepping in to shield them in the courts, right?
Not at all.
There is no safe jurisdiction to flee toward. The societal fracturing will be so severe that family units will turn against each other. And it's right at this peak of unimaginable vulnerability that he drops the phrase, abomination of desolation.
And to a first-century Jewish listener, those words are literally an air raid siren. The phrase originates in the book of Daniel and points to a deeply scarred moment in their national memory.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we follow the reference to Daniel, we're looking straight at the 160s BCE. We are talking about the Seleucid king Antiochus V Epiphanes. And just to be clear, that is Antiochus IV, the ruler who unleashed a devastating religious persecution.
Right. Antiochus V Epiphanes erected an altar to Zeus right inside the temple in Jerusalem in 167 BCE. And he sacrificed unclean animals in the sacred precinct.
Ah, wow.
Yeah. This was a calculated, systemic attempt to eradicate the Jewish religion and forcefully assimilate the population into Hellenistic culture. It was the direct catalyst for the Maccabean revolt.
It's so important to understand the mechanics of this trauma. This isn't just a military defeat. It's like an invading army capturing your nation's most sacred monument, burning your constitution on the altar, and forcing you to worship their emperor right in the ashes.
That's a great way to put it.
It's weaponized defilement meant to break the psychological spine of a culture. By invoking Daniel, Jesus is signaling that history is about to repeat itself in the worst possible way.
And the survival instructions attached to this coming desecration, they leave absolutely no room for hesitation. When they see this abomination of desolation, the command is immediate flight to the mountains of Judea.
Just drop everything.
Literally, if you are on the roof of your house, do not go inside to grab your belongings. If you're in the field, do not turn back for your cloak.
Man, if the stakes are literally drop everything and run, the margin for error is zero. You cannot afford to second guess whether the abomination is actually happening. A persecuted group with no institutional power needs an unmistakable signal to pull the trigger and abandon their lives. So how do they spot the defilement this time around?
Well, the necessity for absolute clarity creates the most fascinating literary moment in the Gospel of Mark. We reach verse 14. Jesus says, "But when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not."
And right there, the text suspends the narrative. It inserts a parenthetical statement, let the reader understand. The author is completely breaking the fourth wall. They are pausing the scene of Jesus talking to Peter, James, John, and Andrew. The writer steps entirely out of the historical timeline, turns to look at the person physically holding the scroll in the future, and whispers a secret code. It's covert communication.
It is, and it fundamentally alters our relationship with the document.
Yeah.
The author or the editor could not explicitly name the impending threat. To do so would likely invite immediate execution by the authorities.
Because it's treason, basically.
Right. They are relying on an in-the-know audience to catch the signal and recognize that standing where it ought not is happening in real time.
And this hidden signal fuels one of the most intense historical debates surrounding this text, because we know that in the year 70 CE, the Roman general Titus marched his army on Jerusalem, besieged the city, leveled it, and completely destroyed the temple. So the question underlying every single verse here is, when did the author actually write down that parenthetical warning?
That is the big question. Some scholars argue the Gospel of Mark was composed before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE. Under that theory, the parenthesis is a desperate, real-time emergency broadcast.
Like a literal warning to run.
Exactly. It's a frantic attempt to wake up the early Christian community, urging them to read the geopolitical signs and flee the city before the Roman siege lines close entirely.
But other scholars look at the precision of the devastation described and suggest the text was compiled just after 70 CE. If General Titus has already burned the temple, then, let the reader understand, serves a very different psychological purpose.
Right, it changes completely.
It becomes a tool for trauma counseling. It tells a devastated community that the horrific violence they just survived was the exact abomination Jesus warned about. It attempts to put a catastrophic historical event into a theological framework.
And the urgency of that debate is violently accelerated by verse 30. Jesus drops a definitive ticking clock into the middle of the prophecy. He states, "Most certainly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen."
Wow. He ties the entire cosmic and political collapse to a specific human lifespan. He isn't offering a vague prediction about an event thousands of years in the future for an audience he'll never meet. He's looking at the people standing in front of him and stating that their immediate contemporaries will live to see the stones fall.
Right. It is a prophecy with a built-in expiration date. And that ticking clock forces the narrative into overdrive. After the localized destruction of the temple and the frantic flight to the mountains, the scope of the prophecy just shatters the boundaries of geography. It moves into absolute cosmic upheaval.
Yeah, the fabric of the universe begins to unravel. The text describes the sun darkening, the moon failing to give light, the stars falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens being shaken.
It's massive.
It is. This grand, terrifying vision culminates with the Son of Man arriving in clouds with great power and glory, sending angels to gather the elect from the ends of the earth.
But then, Jesus anchors this overwhelming cosmic imagery with a surprisingly grounded practical parable. He tells the story of a doorkeeper. A master of a house leaves on a journey and puts his servants in charge, commanding the doorkeeper to stay on watch.
Okay, so just staying awake.
Yeah, the core instruction is simple.
Yeah.
Stay awake. The master could return in the evening, at midnight when the rooster crows, or at dawn. If he arrives suddenly, he must not find the doorkeeper sleeping.
So we really need to examine the logic of this final sequence because the text presents a massive paradox. We just spent this deep dive mapping out an incredibly detailed itinerary of destruction. Jesus provides the opening contractions. He identifies the specific vulnerability before Roman governors. He gives them the coded trigger of the abomination of desolation from Daniel. He sets a literal ticking clock with this generation. He outlines every single domino that needs to fall. And yet, he drops the ultimate cliffhanger in verse 32, the one we started with. But of that day or that hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son, but only the Father. How does the architecture of this prophecy hold together if he knows every intricate step, but is entirely ignorant of the hour it actually triggers?
Well, you are identifying the exact tension that troubled the early church deeply. You have the divine Son of God explicitly stating a firm boundary to his own knowledge. In the context of a developing theology that viewed this figure as all-knowing and divine, this admission of ignorance was profoundly uncomfortable.
I can imagine. Later scribes and theologians must have been sweating over how to frame this verse.
Oh, they definitely were. They dedicated centuries trying to smooth out the edges of that paradox. Some philosophical frameworks argued he only meant he did not know the hour in his limited human nature while retaining the knowledge in his divine nature.
Okay, kind of splitting it up.
Yeah. And other thinkers suggested he did possess the knowledge, but it simply wasn't his role in the divine hierarchy to reveal it to humanity. But the Gospel of Mark does not offer any of those escape hatches. The text is completely unblinking.
It just lets the contradictions stand in the open.
Exactly. The signs are clear, the generation is set, but the exact moment remains an impenetrable mystery to everyone except the Father.
Leaving the reader sitting in that unresolved tension feels incredibly deliberate. Like, You are handed enough historical data to be absolutely terrified. You're given enough specific survival instructions to know you need to abandon your home and run for the mountains, but you are denied the one specific piece of chronological data that would actually allow you to sleep at night.
And that tension is the intended mechanism. The text isn't trying to help the reader calculate a calendar date to circle on their wall. The imperative is to forge a state of constant, vigilant readiness.
Oh, I get it.
The doorkeeper in the parable does not know the hour of the master's return. Therefore, the doorkeeper can never afford to close their eyes. Ignorance of the timeline is the very thing that produces the required vigilance.
What a crushing psychological burden for that early community to shoulder. They are tasked with watching the massive stones of their societal structure, waiting for the political stability to fracture, anticipating the weaponized defilement of their sacred space, and ultimately waiting for the sky to go dark.
It's incredibly heavy.
It is. So I want to turn this over to you, listening right now. We've decoded the imposing stones of Herod's temple, the horrific historical echo of Antiochus the Feat at Epiphanes, and that mind-bending secret fourth wall break in verse 14. Drop a comment below and tell us how you interpret today's historical drama. Based on the covert wink to the reader and the ticking clock of this generation, do you believe this text was a desperate, coded warning distributed right before the Romans encircled the city? Or do you lean toward the theory that it was a theological reflection written just after the dust settled to help a traumatized community process the devastation they just survived? Let us know your theory in the comments.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what people think. The layers beneath the surface of these ancient documents are practically endless once you grasp the historical pressures the authors were facing.
Absolutely. Also, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the political tension and encoded survival tactics of Mark 13, please make sure to like and subscribe to the show. It really helps us bring these ancient texts to life. And definitely check the description below for exclusive links and resources so you can explore the historical context of the Roman occupation for yourself.
There's so much more to dig into.
For sure. And as we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think about the sheer psychological weight of living in that terrifying, in-between time. Imagine being a reader holding this scroll in the late 60s CE. You're armed with the horrifying knowledge of an impending, inevitable collapse of the massive power structures all around you. You know the abomination is approaching, yet you are completely in the dark about the exact day or hour you need to drop your cloak and run. And as you hold that scroll in the actual physical world outside your door, the looming inevitable march of General Titus and the massive Roman army is already heading toward Jerusalem. It leaves you wondering, when those 100-ton stones finally did begin to fall in 70 CE, how did the original readers of this secret warning actually survive the collapse? Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.